Today we're talking to Nick Polce. Nick is passionate about helping organisations build adaptive, responsive and resilient systems that are both value and people-oriented. With a background playing semi-professional sport, he gets a kick out of creating high-performing teams spanning from executives through to development teams. Nick likes to see himself as a culture carrier, passionate about supporting people and achieve their ambitions, and someone who brings his whole self to work. Today, Nick is an Associate Director at Accenture and Business Agility Lead for Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Pete. Pleasure to be here. And you've done your homework,
awesome.
Dave. That was
I have, mate. You've got to tell me about semi-professional sport. What does that mean?
Me to it. That's what I was about to say.
Semi-professional sport. So in this context, I played state-level AFL football over in WA in the league called the Waffle. So played there for a number of years, played 60-odd league games, and had a lot of life experiences that have carried me through to kind of where I am today around team culture, high-performing teams, the ability to respond and adapt to change and all that kind of good stuff.
Yep.
Love it.
I want to come back to that, about the interest that I have in football and the focus on football cultures and how people in executive environments think that is the high point of cultural development, to have your team functioning like a football club. So I want to come back to that at some point. So I'll be interested in your perspective, because I'm
not always the case, but yeah.
All right, let's kick off with a check-in. Given we've all got backgrounds in Agile, I thought the easiest way to do a check-in would be to say, hey, what's the best check-in you've ever done? So for me, the best check-in I've ever done is bringing something completely nerdy to the table. So I've asked check-ins about Dungeons & Dragons. I've asked check-ins about video games, something insanely nerdy, because what happens is there's one person on the team that surprises you. You always find someone who's a bigger nerd than you realise, and they're fantastic opportunities to just kind of get a bit of team cohesion and get some of those weird, nerdy secrets out.
And it gives them the opportunity to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, which is something they've been holding deep down and closed off for most of their life, and it opens them up and gives them the space to talk about
Stop talking about me.
You learn something new every day.
That's it. How about you, Pete?
My favourite check-in is, and I use them quite a lot, is these transformation cards that are really cool. So they're, on our podcast, we've talked about vertical development with Nick Polce a couple of times, and it's been a kind of continuing theme through a lot of our podcasts. And what someone has done is gone and built some picture cards that represent all the individual levels of development. And so what I usually get people to do is choose a card that represents where they're currently at, and then get a card to choose where they'd like to be in the future, and then we discuss what's the gap between current state and future state and how we'd like to get there. And these were actually a gift from Nick Polce from a workshop in Atlanta last year. So thank you very much, Nick.
That was pretty cool.
Very good.
Yeah, they're really good.
My turn.
I'm
going to give you two options. If it's, I'll give you a short version and a long version. So short version, like to open up with what's your worst dad joke, just to kind of relax the mood and the setting of the group, but also to give me material I can use. More importantly, and the second one, if we've got a bit more time and we need to kind of explore a deeper understanding of kind of who we are and open up a really safe space, is to create a bit of a map of a personal map of who we are and what's important to us. So tell the story of Nick or Pete or Dave. Where do we come from? What's our family situation? What are our passions, interests, goals, aspirations? Just to really share a bit more of our personal side of who we are and what we do, just to form kind of a safe space and create a shared understanding of where each person's at.
I think it's really important to go about that in a really nuanced way. Like, I've been in a couple of teams in the past where they've talked about, okay, we want to build a safe space, guys. Let's build a safe space. It's like you're never going to get there by telling everyone this is a psychologically safe environment. You actually need to earn that, and you earn that by being open and vulnerable, and you earn the vulnerability by being open and vulnerable yourself and sharing that and creating that space, which is indirect in a way, can be hard to get to.
Yeah.
I was just speaking to someone yesterday who's a Dare to Lead facilitator with Brene Brown's work, and I remember her saying a quote that said that, one business got her in to do all this work around, business performance and all of that. I want you to come in and help improve the team and do all that, but you can't talk about any of that vulnerability crap. And it's kind of like, that's what I
Okay,
do.
but-
Without that, you're not going to get what you want. But you know what? We've got to separate those. It was actually quite funny.
I've had similar conversations around servant leadership. Do whatever you want to the teams. Don't talk to me about this servant leadership stuff. But yeah, and another really useful technique that I use from time to time is it's more of like a ceremony or ritual to start off. Like, what are your preconceived ideas about why we're here, what we're going to talk about? Write them on a piece of paper, stick them into a physical box, and I'm moving that box outside of the room so we can clear the space without any kind of pre kind of conceived ideas on what we're going to do, what the bias is. Let's just clean the slate and let's move forward with a kind of fresh perspective.
Absolutely. No, definitely.
Good.
So, Nick, what's got your attention at the moment? Tell us about where you're situated, where you're working, kind of what your focus is or what you're passionate about at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So right now, as you've aptly pointed out, I'm the business agility lead at Accenture Solutions IQ. Been there for 2.5 years. When I started there, we had 9 people here locally, and practitioners were doing their best, but kind of the engagements that they worked on probably weren't fulfilling them in the truest sense of kind of agile engagement. So it's been a pretty wild ride over the past 2.5 years. We've grown from 9 people to about 53. And the demand for our services have never been greater. I'm seeing a big lean in of organisations to be more adaptive and responsive to change, and I think kind of the conditions that we've been living in over the past 2 years have amplified or sped up the awareness that volatility is all around organisations. No matter what your size and scale is, you need to think about how you react and respond to change. We know that the smaller, nimble players can do that quite well, but large organisations takes a very, very long time to do. And I've been having lots of conversations with global boards and other kind of top 100 leaders of other organisations about how they might use the learnings from the pandemic that we've all been experiencing. In an example, creating a virtual workforce, right? It's not something they'd had to do en masse, but literally overnight, they had to move their workforce to be virtual. And I have a conversation, well, what are the things that you did? Got a cross-functional team together that represented different areas of the business. We gave them a clear goal or objective, and we unencumbered them from the organisational processes just to get it done. Right, so if that was yours, and most of them did it successfully, so if those are successful ingredients, how do you now apply that in a more proactive manner for greater business or competitive advantage? And that's the challenge, and that's what we're seeing really come through at the market through the market at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd love to get to and we'll pick up sort of that scaling, that enterprise change in a bit. But I'd love to hear about your journey going from a team of 9 to a team of 53. That's no small feat.
Yes, it's rapid scale. That's for sure. And so it was. My strategy around it was being in a large organisation like Accenture provides wonderful opportunities, right? We are a global brand of 500,000 people all over the world. We work with very large organisations, and we have a seat at the table with some very senior people in these organisations. So I could spend my time running around trying to win work, but my strategy was, right, let's talk to the experienced people in Accenture about who we are and what we do and why it's important, get them to advocate for us, and then we come in and assist them and assist clients through the change process. So I've taken the strategy of letting others do the work for me to some degree, but really getting out there and kind of pressing the flesh and doing all that kind of stuff. A bit of a marketing campaign on who we are and what we do and why it's more pertinent more than ever. And I think the pandemic, and I've already touched on it a few times, has really seen our growth kind of increase exponentially as well. Just given that
Probably worth noting that you're
not
you're
optional
talking
anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably worth noting you're talking to us from Melbourne with the end in sight, but very much still in lockdown.
Fingers crossed, mate. Indeed, I am. And as I mentioned to you earlier, before we went on record, I've got a 4.5-year-old that's running around at the moment, and my wife and I are having all sorts of fun juggling him as well as our work priorities. But, we count our blessings. Mate. There are people around the world doing it a lot tougher than ourselves at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you're obviously exposed to a number of different large organisations, and likely you probably can't mention names, but it would be great to hear some stories about how you've seen scaled enterprises respond to a work from home era. Well, or maybe badly too. I don't know, but well would be a good place to start. Yeah,
I mean, from my experience that I have, most of them have actually handled it pretty well. They've had to. I think it's more about the tools that they use and those providers actually scaling with these organisations as the sheer volume of people started working remotely. So I actually think that a lot of the organisations that I've personally been working with over the past 12, 24 months have responded really well, really quite well. And Accenture has done that aptly as well, because we're a consulting organisation, so people are always moving around. But I think that more of the challenge has been around some of these virtual platform providers and creating the capacity for the sheer volume of people that now need to interact on their platforms.
No, absolutely.
That's my take on it. I don't know what you guys think. Be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Pete?
And I think I was talking to this before with Dave before you came online and before we started recording, was that the interest in the future of work, and I was having a bit of tongue-in-cheek with Dave before, and I said, I feel like writing a LinkedIn post that just says, the future of work is not doing everything you did at work on your computer. It's not stacking your diary full of meetings. It's actually a new way of working. It's not just transposing what you did in the physical office into a virtual environment. It's actually about changing the way you work.
Yeah.
And I think, there's kind of two camps, and I've spoken about this in previous podcasts. It really feels like, to me, there's two distinct camps happening at the moment. And there's camp one, which is, let's just wait it out, and then as soon as the tide breaks, we're straight back into the office and pick up where we left off. And then there's kind of camp number two, which is, let's use this as a springboard to completely new ways of working. And I'm really interested in what are the fundamentals of both camp one and camp two, and what are the things that make the difference between an organisation that can pivot in that complexity and uncertainty and go to the springboard versus the one that goes, emu turn, stick my head in the sand, and let's just wait it out. And as soon as that's gone, then we're straight back into the office.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do personally think it's changed how we will work forever. I'm probably personally of the opinion I'll dip into the office every now and then, but I'll have the flexibility, and I'll feel more comfortable than I probably was pre-this, working from home. I do think working from home exclusively has provided a number of different opportunities, both positive and otherwise. So for myself, prior to this, I was travelling every other week all around the world, and to be home for 2 years and spend some quality time with my family and my son has just been awesome. But it also introduced bad behaviours. There's literally no switch off, right? And you got meetings every half an hour. You can't have those water cooler conversations anymore. You can't jump on a whiteboard and thrash something out in half an hour. It's got to be an hour and a half, 120 minutes worth of sessions spread over multiple weeks. I think it's definitely become. I feel it's become more inefficient, and introduced some bad behaviours for me personally. I'm on half an hour calls from dawn till dusk, and you're just exhausted at the end of the day and have no time for actually any doing value add type of work. So it's
oh my goodness, 16 hours of Zoom calls gets to you over time.
Definitely does.
I think Microsoft released their report on remote work or something the other day, and it was everyone's averaging between 17 and 21 more hours a week work.
It's crazy,
just because it's so easy just to stack meeting after, like you said, meeting from 5 o'clock in the morning till 6:15 at night.
It is, and you
Dave
don't
I
have
were
that.
working-
You don't have that commute anymore, so it's
What-
filled up with meetings and. Yeah.
Yep. It's
What-
really easy to become a digital zombie very quickly.
What I'm really interested in is how this turns into something Darwinian. Like, how does this? We were forced into this place. Like, had we decided to go into this experiment, we would have done it with a lot more controls in place. We would have said, how do we get people to switch off? How do we go in? But because we were at the drop of a hat, moved to this whole process of going, okay, we're going to work from home. We're going to have to measure people's performance, asynchronously. We're going to have to measure outcomes rather than attendance to a certain degree, and the attendance is going to be at certain things. Like it in a lot of ways, it's created an environment for us to test and make mistakes really, really quickly. And one of those things I'm thinking about is the personal boundaries. Like, I reflect on what did I learn and what did I pick up. I think the breath of fresh air for me as a digital native was that everyone finally started using the tools I've been rabbiting on about for years prior. I was like, oh my gosh, finally we can move beyond the conversations and start using the tools. So that was
Dave, you were right. The tools are fantastic.
well, I wouldn't go that far.
Thanks, Dave.
But what did get to me is that I would have even people I was directly reporting to pulling me aside and saying, Dave, how are you managing this with your wife? Like, where's the limit? Where do I switch off? Where do I switch on? How do we? I'd end up sitting teams down and saying, how are we time boxing this week, guys? Like, what is it that we're actually structuring our days around? And can you think a bit more abstractly about how you box your time up? It's no longer, we're in a lockdown. It's no longer 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. Maybe it's 3 blocks of 2.5 hours, or something like that.
Exactly right. And for every person, it's different as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it, Dave? I mean, I think it's good in a way because people can set their own boundaries based on their own personal circumstances. Like for me, at the moment, with our little guy with no daycare, 9 up to 12 midday, you can't get me. I'm with my son. That's my kind of daddy daycare duties, and then it shifts over, and my wife takes over in the afternoon. But then I just work late until the evenings. So it's just the kind of shifting of priorities and just being really clear on what it is, and everyone's accepting and understanding that that's just the world we live in right now. So I
walked down the hallway.
The message. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go.
I was just going to say the message to all the viewers out there is just be really clear on setting your boundaries and stick to them, because it's your life, it's your time and space, and people will be really respectful of those given kind of where we're at the moment.
I think that's where the boundaries have shifted, though, is in the past the boundary has been set by the employer, and now the boundary is set by the individual. And so, like, I walked down the hallway just before, and I'm walking past a software development team, and sitting at a table doing some kind of implementation review. They're looking at code and they're comparing things, and the lady's sitting there with a baby on her lap. And I'm just going, isn't that the most beautiful outcome of the last 18 months of hell? Is that actually, like, that was an outside rarity case, and now I'm seeing that more and more and more. People are just like, you know what? It's a half-hour review. I'm just taking my kid. It's fine.
Yep. I've had many calls with senior leaders kicking the ball in the backyard or under a pillow cubby house with my little guy. It's just how we roll at the moment.
Yeah.
It was even interesting to me the other day. Someone had tasked me with designing a senior leadership program, and I decided that I wasn't going to do it at home. So I actually took, like a pen and paper, like physical analog items, down to the Oval with kind of, a little bit of a rug, and just sat down, and I was just like, I don't even know how to use these analog tools anymore. Like, it's really odd not only to say not be in Zoom meetings, but you go and do something without your computer, which is something that you get really quite used to doing. Like, if you're going to do anything these days, it's kind of got to be, even though you're in control of your own environment, you still got to do it virtually or digitally, but actually moving to an analog thing outside where you can enjoy the sun and actually enjoy the best of what the freedom offers and actually go to an analog format was actually quite refreshing. Something that felt like I hadn't done for 20 years.
Yeah, I just know kind of the small glimpses of freedom we've had here in Melbourne. Getting to the office and jumping on a whiteboard and interacting with people in the flesh is just a really bizarre experience. And I will think there will be some, lack of a better word, re-entry issues for people into society. To be perfectly honest, just interacting with people, being in a room together, and the energy that creates is going to be really interesting to see how people react to that.
And I think particularly I would imagine there's got to be some kind of narrative around that at a global firm like Accenture as well, because to a certain extent that's happening at different places at different times at different speeds. I mean, we're talking to you from Adelaide. We have cafes open. We're eating in restaurants where we're largely free, and you're sitting at home and you've got a 10K radius at the moment. It's a very different beast. And there needs to be almost some kind of, I don't know. I remember coming out of lockdown and being absolutely exhausted with human interaction. Like, it was tough to come out of isolation and into a social environment and to reacclimate to that kind of an environment again. And I imagine there's an element of inclusion that needs to be thought about in that space, to say, hey, I know that we've got this sorted, but that team over there, or that individual in that country, or that individual in that team over there is in a very different space. And
Correct.
Us just continuing on the way we've always done it may actually just burn that person out.
Yeah, and being really respectful of the situations that others have been in. So, we've had our freedoms here in Australia. I've been dealing with people in the UK, in the US, in India. It's just being really respectful and just really considerate of what they're going through as well. So I think it's considerations of others that live elsewhere, but also within your home location as well. So some may be ready to step back and interact and really looking forward to it because they're more that outgoing personalities, but those introverts have probably become more introverted, and it'll take them more time to integrate into society and to be comfortable with those conversations again. So it's just, meeting people with where they're at and making sure that they've got all the support around them to feel like they're comfortable in the space that they find themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Nick, let's pivot to agility. Let's talk about agility for a second. Where do you see the current state of affairs is in enterprise at the moment? Maybe within COVID, maybe even just outside of COVID, thinking about the future of agile ways of working. Do you differentiate the two? And if you do, what is the difference and kind of where do you see things stand at the moment?
Really interesting. I think, as I alluded to before, I think the situation we find ourselves in has only kind of expedited the need to be able to respond and adapt to change quicker. So an example of that is a logistical firm in the US that I know quite well basically had to throw out their annual roadmap of initiatives overnight in response to COVID and replan what their strategy and what their initiatives were. And I'm seeing more and more organisations starting to think about that challenge and really starting to draw into that. So how do we create a value-led system that is optimized for flow of information from strategy through to execution? That coming down the chain in months and years is no longer adequate. It needs to be days or weeks. So the C-suite changed their strategy overnight, and information flows are already trickling through the organisation, and adjustments are being made. So it's more about creating like value adaptive systems rather than using the term agile or agility. And it's made up of many different things. It's a very complex ecosystem to unlock that. But I see that's where kind of things are moving into. So it's almost agile, scaled agile were the big things, and business agility. I think it's probably morphing into more around like creating value adaptive systems.
Yep.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I'm going to ask you a really interesting question, Nick. I'd be interested to see your reflections. Having said what you've just said about, having to adjust, and how do you find that leaders who, have built their entire career to get to the top by doing things in a certain way, and then in comes COVID and in comes this significant kind of shake-up, and then they've got to start to think about all the ways that I've done things to get me to where I am in this level of seniority, some of it's still relevant, but a large part of it's not. And how are they adjusting and adapting to this kind of new world of adaptive work and sort of value agility?
Yeah, look, it's been 100% challenging for leaders, just like everyone. It's just the challenges are a little bit different. I think the importance is meeting each individual with where they're at, understanding what their background is, what are they good at, how have they made a name for themselves with leaders that have been successful, and then how do they get that, but taking a different stance. So we can still give you all the things that you need, right? But it's just a different way of getting there, and a way that will ultimately make you more fulfilled as a human, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change the lives of people for the better. They spend a lot of the time at work, so how do we do that through various kind of tools and techniques? But yeah, for leaders, it's been a very uncomfortable ride for them. They've kind of lost. They felt, a lot of the leaders I talk to feel like they've lost a bit of control because they can't feel the people and the teams around them. But I think that's been good in a sense, because it's provided a little bit more autonomy to people and teams. So it's about teaching leaders how they interact differently now. And I think that that physical separation of distance between the leader and the teams has opened up a space for that conversation.
So what would you say to people then who are in that position now, still perhaps floating? Because, in some places there's still very much, a lockdown or an adaptive environment that they're responding or reacting to. What would you say to people who are in that environment by themselves, or feel like they're in that environment by themselves, and there's not that, we want to help them get there? They're by themselves. They've got to help themselves get there. Like, what would be your advice to someone who's got to help themselves in that environment, whether they're a chief executive who's got to try and drive the next season of business, or a team leader that feels a little bit siloed or floating?
So I think the there's probably three most important things that I would pass on to them is be really clear on your objectives. So what do you want to achieve, and how are we going to know that we're getting there? So really, in trend goal setting technique, our objectives and key results, OKRs. So what do we want to achieve aspirationally? How do we measure we're going to get there, and communicate that really clearly, really simply to your people? Secondly, ask them what's getting in their way, and removing those things. That is probably your most important job. A lot of the leaders I work with, first thing I get them to do is set up an impediment board. Just stick it in front of their workspace, set it up virtually, and just get people to start putting stuff on there. Invite people, whatever problems, curly challenges, impediments you're having, stick them on my impediment board, and I'm going to dedicate an hour first thing every morning to removing one of those items.
I remember it was probably the defining moment where I realized Agile is going to make a difference in business. Was we talked about having these adaptive teams, and we'd created these visual management boards, and we'd built a very similar thing around risk. And we said, risk and governance is in the Obeya room, and you're going to go into this room, and it's transparent, it's on the wall, and you're going to go in and you're going to look at this, and every day we're going to talk about it. And we only talk about it for a couple of minutes, but we'll talk about it so that we know what's going on. And one particular week, we walked in, and there was a particular issue that had been there for ages and ages and ages, and it had moved, but it had moved into a space where it was almost there, but now really, really stuck. And the project sponsor walked in, and we stood in front of this board, and he looked at it, and we spoke about it, and then he looked at the person who knew a lot about this particular thing. He says, "What do you need to get this out of stuck?"
Yeah.
And the person said, "Well, I need X, Y, and Z." And he looked at her like, no word of a lie, this was like the penny drop moment for me. He looked at her and he goes, "It'll be done by lunch." And he walked out of the room, and that was it. And I was just like, holy shit.
How powerful is that?
Oh, completely. Like, it completely changed. Project governance does not need to be a formality. It can be it can have goosebump moments.
It can be an enabler.
Yeah, it can be a real driver of value, not just because you think about the impact that has on that's a junior member of the team who doesn't have direct contact to the sponsor, being told, "I value your time, I value your contribution. I will help you get there.
Yeah.
I'll have it done by lunch. Like, that's massive.
It makes the people feel valued, and for the
Yeah.
leader, it makes them feel really fulfilled. Like, it gives them this sense of pride and personal kind of satisfaction and gratification that they've been able to do something really material to change change the course of someone's day.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. No, it's a big shift to be able to go into that space, and I guess that's probably where we can maybe foray a little bit into servant leadership and where that comes into it as well, because that's obviously a key part in making all this work. Have you seen servant leadership grow in its profile over the last couple of years?
I have, without kind of labeling it servant leadership. For me, it's just the kind of the modern way of leading, and I draw on my sporting experience quite a bit when I'm talking to leaders about what it means and how you create high performing teams, and taking the stance of really being there as a supporter and enabler rather than a kind of point person and one that kind of all information has to flow through.
Maybe for the benefit of the audience, let's pretend those listening have a very strong management or operational background and are being introduced to servant leadership. What are the hallmarks that make a servant leader that's different to what would traditionally be seen as a leadership position?
Yeah, so fundamentally, it's about shifting your stance from one that is kind of giving orders and being involved in the details and really pulling the levers, being the puppet master for everything, for really being the supporter of the team, really behind the team, setting that light on the hill, and then being there for when the people need direction and clarity and support. So it's really shifting that stance, and I'm sure that you both have read kind of David Marquette's work on this topic, but for those in the audience that aren't familiar with that, he was a naval submarine captain, and he took kind of the worst performing ship into the highest performing ship by not giving another order, but really making it all based around intent and asking really powerful questions from people when they come to him looking for an answer. It's more about giving him questions and getting them to come up with their own answers and understanding the context in which they surround themselves in, to be able to succeed as a collective, because he was finding he would be the one kind of doing all the work, giving all the orders, and he never had time to spend with his family. So let's use the collective brain power of 150 people that were on his submarine rather than one to achieve your missions or your objectives in the naval sense.
Yeah, and that's the Turn the Ship Around, I believe, is the book. We'll
Turn the
pop that
Ship Around is the
in
book,
in the show notes. I believe he's in the middle of writing another one at the moment. And
he has released another one.
He has released another one. It's been a while, but I did hear him speak on a podcast and said he was in the process of writing another one. So it sounds like that's already come out.
That's already out on the shelves. I'll find the name for it, and we can put it on the notes as well.
Which is really interesting when you think about it, because it's such a counterintuitive approach to that particular context. Because military is usually quite hierarchical, command and control down the hierarchy, and then not only have you seen David and his example with the submarines move across, but then you've also seen, Stanley McChrystal with his book Team of Teams, where he, restructured the entire sort of special operations division around kind of breaking down all those barriers and having a lot more informational transparency. Again, one of those major impediments that you talk about, when you don't know what's going on or you don't have all the information, it's not optimal to make decisions or, good decisions or any decision at all if you don't have the required information.
Yeah, exactly. You think about it, what do they do on the field? I think this agility or adaptability lends really well to that context, because you've got all these people, you've got an objective, you've got a mission, you're very clear on what that is, you've got a cohort of people that are trying to get there, and you've almost got this mission control where you've got the captain who's understanding what the progress of things are and is kind of making adjustments or sending in support when needed. And that's really what we're trying to do in a business context. Set that really clear objective, unleash your workforce, and just be there to kind of help them and bring in reinforcements and shuffle things around to make sure that you achieve that objective.
Yeah, that's fantastic. His other book is Leadership is Language, The Hidden Power of What You Say and What You Don't. I wonder if that's actually a really good segue. You mentioned before about building teams or I guess building agility around adaptive value, like building around the production of value and whatever that looks like as things change or strategies shift. How do people fit into that? Like, is there an adaptive production of a people environment? Like, Pete and I talk about above and below the line. You've got the delivery of that value at the above the line piece, but if we think about, that running of that submarine, you've also got a cohort of people, of human beings living on that submarine that you're going to have to look after to some degree, and you're going to have to motivate and drive to do their life's best work. So, how does that fit into the agility space for you?
For me, it is the most important thing. So if we don't have people that are clear on the value that they're delivering day in, day out, don't feel supported, and have those intrinsic motivators, your system will fall apart. And I know that's been something that's really been, or something that I get a kick out of in creating high-performing teams, is how we create that culture and set the foundations that really allow people to bring their full self to work and enjoy what they do. I'm really big on cultural values and creating a safe space for people, and hiring for culture add rather than culture fit, right? We get the best results when we have people that come from different walks of life that bring different stances, different ways of thinking, and that's where you get the most creative and the most innovative outcomes. So supporting people and giving them those intrinsic motivators to do their best day in, day out is fundamental for a value adaptive system.
Yeah, I think about, and we've talked about this on one of our other podcast interviews, is locker room hires. And how you see this in professional sport at the moment. It's something that I think would be an interesting one for teams or managers to think about going forward as well. Is we're seeing the rise of locker room hires in professional sport. So a team would hire someone who is better in the locker room than they are on the court or are on the field. And the job of that person is to motivate and inspire and hold accountable and drive. Usually a veteran, usually someone who's been around the block and has the respect of the team. But they're not coaching staff. They're on the field. They're wearing the jersey. They're side by side with the boys or the girls and driving a certain type of behaviour. And I think about that when we're building a team as well. I think how often we'll do a great job of sourcing or hiring an expert, or we'll find a great scientist, or we'll find a good consultant, or we'll drive a great systems thinker, or we'll drive a great, a great cultural contributor or leader in the team. But have we found a good person that drives the mindsets and the culture of the team? Do we find someone who acts as glue and binds the team together, that can start to really build on how the team actually work together, not just output?
Yeah, I love that concept. I think it's really important. And if I reflect on all the high-performing teams that I've been involved in a kind of sporting and professional sense, we've most definitely had that element in the team dynamic. So someone who wasn't necessarily the best player or the most skilled in their craft, be that professional or sporting, but their role was just as important as everyone else's. And they knew what their role was, and everyone else knew what their role was, and what this person's role was. And we were able to feed off each other and achieve really great outcomes in every single instance. So, yeah, I love that concept of that locker room hire.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let's talk about enterprise change. So we've kind of touched on agility and how it, the agile, the scaled agile, the move to kind of have these regimented things has been shaken up and become more adaptive. It's become more agile. I love it, and that's shaking up enterprise. So what are you seeing? And I guess for people, let's put in the context of our audience. So what are you seeing managers and leaders having to face into, navigate, and deal with in the face of enterprise change, where the system is far bigger than any one person, far more complex than any one team, but they're having to make their own contribution to that change?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging, and I think this starts to weave into what is your transformation strategy, and there are there are many different paths you can take with that. Seen organisations go big bang, and there were reasons why they did that. They wanted to burn the bridge behind them, so there was no point of return. And that's a valid strategy for some organisations. Some are more incremental and iterative in their fashion, more agile in nature, and that has a different change journey for people as well. So people, you've kind of got those first what cabs off the rank that are probably the most experienced and understand the context in which they're kind of foraying into. But for others that don't know what that change means for them yet, it gives them an opportunity to go in and observe and reflect and understand what it means to them, and it allows them to go on their own personal learning journey before the change really impacts them. And then there's another potential pattern or strategy that large organisations could use. I've never had the chance to do it, but I'd love to do it one day, is effectively start up a version 2.0 of your organisation. Buy a WeWork space or a small little office and start up a small subset of your business. It might be, let's just say in a financial services context, it might just be credit cards or something. Start up your credit card business as 20 people in the office next door with no organizational processes or legacy systems that they have to work with. Run it lean, run it as a startup, and eventually just incrementally add more and lean out your organization through that radical transformation process.
I've got a client right now who's doing that without the office.
Awesome, man.
They're actually completely distributed. They've got people in different states in the US, in Canada, and here in Australia, and they're completely spread out. There's no one place anything happens, but they're building. The analogy I've used with them in the past is what you're doing is the same thing, say, Fairfax Media did with digital. You know, it's like it was a little skunk works once upon a time, and all of a sudden it became the behemoth that supplanted print, you know? And it will be the same thing. It's doing the time, it's managing it well, it's governing it well and putting in the effort. And like you said, it's starting from strategy and coming right the way down to actually delivering something. But like you said, it's having that transformation strategy and driving that change through the business. But yeah, it does happen, and it's very cool to see that kind of actualizing out there in the world. Yeah, definitely.
Very
I actually
cool.
think it's probably if you can get the thing that makes it work, and the thing that's made this particular one work has been CEO and board sponsorship, right? Like that's definitely being able to give the freedom and the license to play and to try and to discover, as almost like you're effectively building a learning organization from the ground up, right? Because what it's doing is it's discovering itself as it builds a revenue stream, and by the time it's arrived at a sustainable, growth-oriented revenue stream, it's also got the learning organization DNA well and truly embedded within it, and then you go scale that, you know, and then all of a sudden you've got something that you can develop and grow organically in the right way with all the right DNA. So it's a very cool thing to see happen, and it does work. And I think it's something that organizations should do more is give, this would be a team of a dozen people. Like, it's not a huge team. It doesn't need to be a huge team, but that team can go from a dozen to 53 very quickly, should it need to.
Yeah, indeed.
So
I think it's a valid transformation strategy that, as you say, more organisations should consider adopting when they're going down this evolution route. Yes.
Yes.
I think it's the other thing to consider is there's a significant difference between scale and replicate.
Yes.
And scale means just make something that already is working bigger, and at some point it reaches that sort of terminal size and then starts not to work, whereas you kind of contain the structure that does work at the size it works and replicate that as a separate thing, rather than just... Because once you scale things, like obviously your governance and all your controls needs to increase, and then you kind of...
slow the machine down.
And get to a point where everything you add on then diminishes the return. So rather than just scale something, how do you stop something that works at the right size and replicate that?
Exactly right. Yeah.
definitely.
And I think there's a confusion around those two things because people go to scale more often and then can't figure out why things lose their velocity and lose their effectiveness and lose their value delivery because they start to get slowed down because of their size, as opposed to let's just make more of what we've already got.
Correct.
And manage that complexity.
And network them.
Yep.
Yep.
Couldn't agree more.
And I think,
yeah.
and that's where you see, companies like Hire, which have gone to their kind of internal marketplace, where each kind of business function sort of negotiates its own kind of workings with other teams, which are function as particular micro businesses inside this kind of micro business ecosystem, which is where they've kind of gone, actually, if we just scale that stops working. Let's just do multiples of this and see how they interact with each other and then manage the interactions rather than the scale, which tends to hit a point where it doesn't deliver more value beyond a certain point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to running out of time, so I want to focus in on a few closing questions. What I want to do is probably put the cynical hat on for a second, because there have been and probably would be a large audience of people who have been through some kind of agile something and it has not gone well. And they're probably sitting here going, you guys are talking so much smack. I have no idea how you can even think this way about agile, because they tried that at my work and it was terrible. So what do you think is the most common trip up for organizations trying agile, or for people who have experienced an agile environment that maybe was a negative experience, and why would that have been a negative experience? And then what and I guess probably to follow that on, what do you think, or what is your encouragement for people to try agile in a new light?
Yeah, great question. So I think first and foremost, I think I've definitely seen incorrect application of what agile actually is, and bad application, no matter what the context, will result in a negative result. So
less than optimal outcome.
Yeah, and let's be honest, it's a very, very deep topic, right? Agile is first and foremost around mindsets, values, and principles. It's not Scrum, it's not Kanban. It's more of a mindset and behavioural approach to how work is done. It's manifested in all those techniques that I've just talked about. And I think people lose sight of that, and they think more about the practical application rather than the mindset and behaviours that is what agility actually is. So I think that's one. I think the practical application is absolutely another one. Thinking back in the day, throwing a few post-it notes on the wall and having a 15-minute catch-up every day is going to make us agile. No, it's actually a lot deeper than that, and when applied correctly, is actually more rigorous and more involved or more intensive than traditional ways of working. So bad application.
I try to explain to people that agile is governance through transparency, and they look at me like, no, it's not. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
But it when done well, you build a really stringent QA/QC process around delivery by outcome, and you know exactly when things aren't working.
Exactly right. And I think another blocker that may have impacted people's experience negatively is the way that organisations actually try and transform in this space. So try and do it all at once, very much focus on the practices without kind of the system around it. So I see I see it a lot where organisations effectively just change project to team and program to tribe, and we're agile, but nothing around the team construct has materially changed. So there's no technology foundations in place for them to allow them to move at speed. The way that work comes in doesn't flow efficiently and creates stop-start behaviours. So project-based funding rather than kind of more persistent capacity-based funding. So I see a lot of organisations just change their team construct, or even worse, just the naming of what the teams are, but not change the system around the team itself from that process and technology perspective that actually allow them to be more adaptive and more responsive to change through new technologies and through simplified processes and governance.
Well, just thinking about simplified processes and governance, like one of the things that I worry about larger enterprises doing is getting into that space of over-engineering the process and providing managers with more and more bureaucracy to try and drive through their teams. While their teams become agile and use an agile tool, the manager gets the manager or the team leader or whatever they might be just gets their handcuffs on and kind of hands tied behind their back. What have you seen work well? I'm thinking about managers who might be listening to this. What have you seen well that drives good team performance at that reporting level, like at that executive reporting up, looking up, stakeholder engagement type level, rather than like, it's all well and good to say, oh, use Asana or use Jira or blah, 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 and run your tasks and run your Kanban. It's fantastic. Abstract that to the management or leadership level and start to engage with the business. And that gets a lot more difficult. What have you seen work well?
I think change management has a massive part to play in it. I think creating a culture of ownership throughout the
onto something there.
create a culture of ownership is imperative, right? A culture of everyday risks. So me working in an agile team, I've got a risk, I've got an issue, something getting in my way. I make that visible, I make that transparent, all to the team, to the leaders. It's about collective ownership of outcomes. And I think for leaders, probably the most important thing they can do is create that safe space that allows people and teams to feel comfortable talking about these things. And I think a great example of this is failure, right? The first example of failure that happens in an enterprise, I always wait to see what the reaction of leaders are to that. Tells a lot about the transformation. So if the leaders are really kind of embrace that as learnings and support the people and teams involved in that process, I know that we're getting there and we're on their way. If there's a negative impact to that and the team gets impacted negatively, it moves the transformation needle back at least 6 months. So I think as leaders sitting there, try and create that culture of everyday ownership. Be really clear with the objectives that you're setting the team, so there is kind of radical transparency on what you're trying to achieve. Lean out so others can lean in and take responsibilities, and you be there and simply ask powerful questions of the team. Show up, ask them how you can help, what's getting in their way. People come to you with risks, take ownership of those and remove them as fast as you can. And you'll just watch the surge through the organization, and the energy that creates will become really powerful and will allow you just to effectively sit back and really connect with your strategy a little bit deeper. And almost when it performs really well, you should almost have a dashboard that you can see in real time on the performance of your organization against your strategy.
1,000%. I think there's...
Funny you should mention that.
I know.
We were just having that conversation prior to starting off this particular podcast. So
absolutely.
It's interesting to see the effect that you can have, what I call the agile hamster, right? Where everyone, the team is just, they're smashing out their tasks without that kind of concern for that psychologically safe space.
Order,
and yeah, exactly. And that Google has been, very, very clear through their sort of team study that if the psychological safety aspect is like, it's a 20% bump in your performance and productivity versus a 17% reduction if you don't have it. So
wow.
Yeah,
right.
That's massive. It doesn't surprise me. I see it a lot. I'm sure you guys too. Where you got 100%. Teams working on widgets, not really understanding what they're doing or why they're doing it, but they're being asked to, and that's what they've always done. So.
That comes back, I think, to what you said before about the change management piece. And, Dave and I have seen something similar tried to be implemented. And when people started asking, like, why are we doing this? Like, the consultants were saying, well, don't worry about it, just trust the process. And I'm like, really? Like, if I don't know why I'm doing it.
It's not a great change strategy.
No, exactly.
Just trust us.
And I think that's one of the reasons Agile gets such a bum steer. And for the reason that you said before as well, is people talk about it. Like, whenever anything's unstructured or people don't get the result they want, they go, it's agile, meaning like it's, let's just be agile. So there's no accountability, there's no structure, there's no something. And as you've mentioned, agile done well has quite a lot of discipline and quite a lot of, it's more structured than traditional process. And then you get these kind of change management, I'll just touch the process, don't worry about it. And it's like, no wonder you're getting these kind of fluffy results. two of the primary fundamentals.
Exactly. And being clear on why you're trying to do it. That's one of the first questions asked.
exactly.
Why Agile? Because everyone else is doing it is not a valid response. And let's...
they just assume somebody else has already asked that question, right? Where so many times it's like, oh, no one's asked that yet. Actually, we don't need to do it at all.
Exactly. And Mythbuster, they think it's immediately going to make you faster, but that may not necessarily be the case. It might slow you down a little bit. But when you come out of it, you will be more efficient and get more throughput and unlock more value. But you're thinking you flick the switch and you put some post-it notes up on a wall and you're going to be faster overnight is a big misconception.
Yeah, and I think the impact of that kind of an environment on, I guess, what I would determine as creative direction or innovation, or however a business might wrap it up. But I think that, to just see the creation of value as the end product of a process well run means that you're missing the opportunity to find the multiplier or find the innovative idea or find the whatever. And this is something that's well and truly maintained within the creative profession, but it's not something that's done well within, and for instance, an engineering profession or something that doesn't necessarily need to do this on a daily basis, but to create a space where you have psychological safety, or there's a good correlation between creativity and play, right? If you don't have a psychologically safe environment for people to play within, you're not going to have the creativity that's going to move the needle. You're not talking about 10% movement. A creative idea might multiply a revenue stream or add an entirely new one. You're talking about huge multiplier effects on a business, as opposed to, we got a 17% bump in our productivity this quarter.
I moved that post-it note.
Yes. And I think there is a big void out there in an opportunity space around true product management. I don't large organizations try and tackle it, but they don't have that in their DNA as they're moving through these transformations. So how do you create that culture where you're continually going out there seeking feedback? One of the common questions I asked the leaders and teams is, when is the last time you actually went out and interacted with a customer on the street? And the answer is invariably never.
Never. And it's a weird one, because I'm not entirely sure the answer is necessarily about build the culture within. Let's talk about the ad space, right? Ad agencies exist for a reason, because a big super fund or a bank or anything like that can't build an ad agency. They don't have it in them to run a good ad agency. An ad agency has the DNA of an ad agency, and they come up with really good ideas on a regular basis and are chaotically creative all the time. And it's a headache to deal with, and they're really interesting people for all the right and wrong reasons, and it's a fantastic space to be exposed to, but you wouldn't want to put that inside of a bank. Do you know what I mean? It's a different kind of environment. And I don't know, one of the things I've been considering more often than not more recently is innovation and the creation of value and product management and the evolution of product and customer interaction, perhaps something that's becoming more of a specialist artisan work that lives in the hands of specialist product managers that potentially cannot be engineered out of a enterprise.
Yep. Yeah, I personally don't think they can be engineered out of an enterprise, but enterprise should be looking to hire that capability, be that outsource or direct hire. It's a skill that is very hard to master. It takes a number of years, like any discipline, really. And I do think there's a shortage of that skill or discipline in the market at the moment. Just given the sheer volume of organisations that are looking to embrace more agile and adaptive ways of working and being more customer-centric.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, that's kind of done for time. So what I want to do before we wrap up is have you leave our audience with something to go and apply in their life. So before we wrap up, what's one thing, if people were considering Agile or reconsidering, maybe entertaining agility one more time, what would be your one piece of advice? What would you have them go do?
Great question. So for leaders, I'm gonna break it up into a couple of personas.
Yep.
So for leaders,
go for it.
For leaders, I think the most powerful thing you can do is to create that impediment board for your people and teams.
It's great.
So step one, set that up and invite people to throw things in there and dedicate half an hour to an hour every day to tackle those challenges. For people on the ground that want to try a different way of working, I think now's a really unique opportunity to do so, because you've got a little bit of distance from management, so to speak, but really deeply understand what it means to be agile and apply it in its truest sense. So don't cut corners, don't compromise, follow it to the letter of the law initially until you deeply understand what it truly means. The whole shuhari is a concept. So actually apply it, create a deeper understanding, and evolve the practices to suit your context over time. Don't try and do it overnight. The pattern that I have in my mind is apply it consistently for 3 months. Learn all about it. Start evolving it once you become kind of deeper ingrained in it, and then continue to reflect and adjust on your way of working, because it doesn't have an end date. And that's why I get kind of hung up on the word transformation. You should always be seeking for ways to do things better. It's a continual evolution. So apply it as it's meant to be applied, create a deeper understanding, evolve it based on your unique context, and never stop reflecting and adapting.
Learn the rules before you break them.
I've heard that once or twice before.
Indeed.
Very good. Nick, thank you so much for your time, mate. Really, really appreciate you making the time for the podcast today.
Yep.
No, thank you both. Hopefully I didn't rabble on a bit too much, and the users out there got some kernels of wisdom.
Absolutely, mate. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening. What's Next is brought to you by The Next. We are workplace futurists and transformation facilitators. You can reach us on the web at www.thenextnxt.com.au. Please ensure you subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss our up and coming episodes.